Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Language. I am Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur and we are in the 4th week of the course. We are in this week talking about word processing, word meaning, how do you use words, how do you store the meanings, how does meaning get represented in the brain, and so on and so forth. This is only the second lecture of the week. In the last lecture I talked to you a little bit about how meaning might be represented. We talked to you about one of the ways that could be introspection. We talked to you about the semantic networks theory, which was propounded by Collins and Quillen. We also talked to you a little bit about association, okay, how words could be linked with each other by just the virtue of being associated with each other, and that association could happen due to a variety of things. The association could happen because they are semantically related, but the association could also happen that because those words are just co-occurring together adequate number of times for your brain to be linking them up. Okay. So, this whole concept of fountain and pen being associated, even though fountain and pen do not have really any semantic relationship if you really think of it, but they are just because mentioned together so many times that now in your head whenever you say fountain, one of the completions you might think of is pen. You might say, for example, if you have read a lot of Ayn Rand, you might say fountain head as well, but that is a different thing. Okay. Let us talk a little bit about a different approach to understanding meaning, and this one of the crux of this approach comes in this question or in the concern, and the concern is even if you talk about semantic networks or you talk about association, it is very interesting that, say for example, we are linking the meaning of a particular word to another word. Meaning of this one is related to the meaning of this one, which is related to the meaning of the other one and to the other one, and so on. And basically what is happening is the entire concept of meaning is just staying within a particular level of this particular network. Okay. This basically has been people have identified that this could be a little bit problematic, and problematic in a way I will tell you how. There is this problem called the grounding problem, and the grounding problem basically refers to the fact that symbols need to be grounded, or symbols meanings need to be grounded in some set of representations outside the symbol system. Okay. I can take an example to elaborate this to you as well. So, if you have read anything from John Searle, you will probably have read a little bit about Searle's Chinese room problem. And the Chinese room problem goes like this. It says that imagine yourself that you are in this room, and the room has no doors, no windows, nothing, but it just has couple of slots. And in this couple of slots, basically what can happen is that somebody who is there, who is outside this room, and somebody can kind of from one of these slots send in a card, and this person has written in Chinese on that card. Okay. Somebody writes something in Chinese on that card and puts it through the slot. You look at that symbol, and there is a directory here that whenever this symbol comes, this another symbol has to be given. So, you are waiting, somebody sends in a symbol, you see acha, this symbol is coming, this symbol goes with this one, so I send out that symbol. Another symbol comes, I know another symbol that I have to give, another symbol comes, I know another symbol that has to give. Now, if this is happening perfectly fine, and in some sense you are answering all the questions that are being posed by this person outside in Chinese. So, the entire conversation is happening in Chinese, the cards outside and the cards inside are both in Chinese. How do you really say, what do you really say about the knowledge of Chinese that this person has or you have at this point? Very easily it can be said that you answered all the questions that came inside in Chinese by using some of the symbols that were in Chinese, but you did not know any of these Chinese, you did not know any of what the symbols mean. So, the idea is by association or by semantic networks, what probably can happen is that your entire conception of meaning is just stored in one network, in one place. In order for you to actually understand the meaning of something, the meaning should be stored outside of this system in a separate manner. So, meaning, say for example, if you ask me what is an apple and I tell you an apple is a fruit which is red in color and sweet in taste, that is one way of describing it. But you might not get satisfied with that. Arey, what is an apple? Explain me. I can draw that to you, but that's again a representation. What is an apple? If unless I eat that apple and touch that apple and interact with that apple, I don't actually know what an apple is. People talk about so many different things, so many different concepts, some things that you have never really come across or never really personally experienced. So part of the whole meaning understanding exercise should be some kind of experiences that you can have, and these experiences can be first hand or this could be associated in a vicarious way as well. I am not saying that everything you will have to have first hand experience with. You might remember this very interesting movie called Aankho Dekhi, wherein something of a similar sort is discussed, but the idea is, coming back to this, is that the symbol grounding problems raises the very important concern. Meaning should be stored outside of this symbol of system of symbols. Comb was referred to as the follicle distribution system, okay, but it does not tell me anything if I do not understand what each of these words mean. So if I just go by dictionary entries, I am describing the words in another words, and that is what I am doing. I am not really getting to the meaning. It should be more than that. That more is basically handled in a different kind of approach to meaning, one that is referred to as embodied semantics, and that is what we will talk about now. So embodied semantics basically believes that abstract symbols like words, they carry meaning because they are tied to representations outside the linguistic system. So these words and their representations are basically tied to other kinds of representations which are not linguistic in nature, but which might be sensory perceptual in nature, which might be perception perception and action kind in nature. Say for example, the representations could be built up by our sensory apparatus or perceptual apparatus, so touch, taste, smell, those kind of things. So words basically what they do is they have meaning because they evoke these perceptual experiences with respect to these real world objects. So when you say apple, I can imagine that red fruit, I can imagine its taste, and that is how I am understanding what exactly the word apple means. Okay, that is this thing, and this happens using something called the indexical hypothesis. We will talk about the indexical hypothesis now. The indexical hypothesis was put forward by Bergen and Robertson in the year 2000. What does the indexical hypothesis says? Indexical hypothesis prescribes a particular way of establishing a word's meaning, and it says that basically this entire process should have three system should have three basic processes. The first process will be indexing. So indexing is basically that the word must actually be tied to actual objects in the world or analog representations of those in the mind. Say for example, cat, bat, rat, dog, etc. should have actual representation in the word, that this is the object that this word stands for, something like that. Or it could be abstract representation. I could be talking about this particular image, so triangle or anything for that matter. The another important process in this indexical hypothesis after is, so one was indexing, the other is affordances. What is affordance? Affordance is basically using this indexed object to derive some kind of action possibilities. Affordances are action possibilities. What can you or how can you interact with this object? Okay, and this basically is the set of possibilities of interaction, and this is partly derived by our perceptual abilities and partly by the physical characteristics of these objects. Say for example, a chair affords sitting. When I look at a chair, I know that I can sit on that chair. Partly it is because I am seeing the chair and I am kind of judging from the physical characteristics of this. Second is I know what sitting is. Both things. Okay, the combination of this is called judging affordances. So first was indexing, second was affordances. The third important concept here is this concept of meshing. What is meshing? Meshing is when you look at this word, you look at its index and you look at its affordances and you combine the indexed objects affordances. So indexing and affordances, you just combine them together. So you mesh or combine the affordances of different indexed objects and characters in the utterance. So that defines the whole utterance. That is what basically conveys the meaning of that entire phrase or structure or a word that you are going to say. So what are you doing? I am kind of let us say this again in a very simple manner. If you come across a word or a phrase or a utterance, first thing that you will do is you will look for its indexing. What does it represent in the actual word? And the second is how do you interact with that object. So, affordances, and every object that you would know of, chair, it is represented by these set of sounds and affords these kinds of interactions. So, both of them together get initiated whenever you hear a word, or suppose you have to understand the meaning of this word chair, both of them should come together and be combined with each other or meshed with each other. This is the embodied semantics approach to meaning. Now, embodied semantics approach to meaning, there could be, you would want to test whether it is actually correct or not. So, we saw some tests with respect to the priming studies in the semantic networks and the association tasks. How do you check for the embodied semantics approach? Yes, people have devised some very interesting experiments. I will discuss some of those experiments here. In one of the studies, Bergen and Robertson, basically in the year 2000, they basically asked participants to judge the fitness of the critical objects and scenarios. How are these objects and scenarios linked to each other? Basically, they gave their participants these kind of sentences. The first sentence was, Marissa forgot to bring her pillow to the camping trip, and the second was, you have to judge the fitness of the second and third sentence to the first sentence. She filled up an old sweater with leaves, or she filled up an old sweater with water. So, you have to kind of read this and say which of the two sentences here fits better with the first sentence. What was the first sentence again? Marissa forgot to bring her pillow in the camping trip. Alright, she needs a pillow probably. She filled up an old sweater with leaves to make a pillow, or she filled up an old sweater with water to make up a pillow. Now, what you have to do is you have to read this B and C and you have to say whether B fits A better or C fits A better, and yeah, you can pause, you can check what is your suggestion, because leaves can be filled up as in the sweater and they will not really go either make the sweater wet or not be feasible, basically because leaves match the affordance of being filled up in the sweater. The second sentence is responded to faster and in affirmative. The second sentence, the one that has water, is not. Okay, even though they mentioned that the association values of both water and leaf is very similar, but leaves work much better here as compared to water, because you know how leaves are in the real world, what kind of indexing they have, what kind of affordance that they allow. Okay. So, this is one of the evidences, one of the studies that kind of tells us that yes, we do calculate affordances of these objects. That is the idea. Glenberg and Kashak, another study 2002, they asked participants to make plausibility judgments, and the plausibility judgments were like, say for example, they had to say whether this sentence is plausible or not. While giving the response, they also were asked to make particular kinds of body movements. What kind of body movements, what kind of sentences? Let us look. The sentences could be anything like he opened the drawer, and the other sentence could be he closed the drawer. You have to just see, is it plausible, is it not, can the drawer be opened, can the drawer be closed, something like that. While you were saying this, you are making the plausibility judgment, you would be required to do one of the two kinds of movements. The two kinds of movements were, either you have to say he opened the drawer like this, or you have to say he opened the drawer like that. Similarly, either you have to say he closed the drawer like this, or you have to say he closed the drawer like that. Now, you see here, if you know anything about opening a drawer, the motion is this kind of motion. If you are saying this, he opened the drawer, with making this kind of movement, there is a bit of a match here, a congruency here. If you are saying he opened the drawer by making this kind of motion, he opened the drawer, there is a mismatch here in the actual action versus what you are doing. So, there is a bit of an incongruency here. The idea is to check whether the motion that you are making, its congruence matters or not. What did they find? They found that subjects' responses were faster when the motion undertaken to make the response matched with the motion represented in the sentence. So, when there was congruency, subjects were faster. When there was incongruency, the subjects were slower. That is what exactly happened. Now, this is this whole thing. This kind of leads to the evidence. It kind of leads to the evidence in support of the mentally indexed embodied semantics kind of approach. Okay. So, this is how they say that okay, maybe what we are doing is when we are reading the sentence, we are mentally simulating this action, opening of the drawer, and because our mental simulation matches with this response, this becomes slightly faster. When our mental simulation of opening the drawer does not match with this, then our response becomes slower. That is exactly what is happening here. Okay, and this is also taken as an evidence for the embodied semantics kind of approach. Another study, Tucker and Analyst measured participants' power grip or precision grip while performing a semantic categorization task. So, the participants had to do a semantic categorization task, basically saying whether this particular object belongs to this category or not. So, animal or not, tool or not, something like that. Okay. And basically what they were supposed to do, they were either used to basically make the responses by having a power grip. Say for example, the power grip is something that you apply when you are holding a weapon in hand, say for example a hammer or a saw or a scissor, not a scissor, a hammer or something like that. A precision grip is what you use when you have to write. Say for example, this is the precision grip versus this one is called the power grip. Okay. So, this is the idea. Participants responded faster for objects like hammer or shovel in the power grip condition, because the object and the kind of grip that is there is congruent. Participants were slower when they were to respond to these objects in the precision grip kind of condition. So, hammer or shovel in the power grip was faster, hammer or shovel in the precision grip was slower. Objects like pen were faster in the precision grip, obviously similar objects would be slower in the power grip condition. Again, the evidence of the fact that we might be simulating some of these actions in our head while we are making these judgments. So, another kind of study, when people respond to hand related actions like swing, cut, etc., MEP activity, so muscle this motor evoked potential activity or hand muscles decreases, while that for feet remains unaffected. So, if you are talking about verbs which are hand related action verbs, the MEP activity decreases in their hand muscles because of some kind of preparation probably happening, but it does not remain exactly the same for leg related actions. So, apparently this processing is really happening in a very neurally grounded sort of a way. When arm areas of the brain are stimulated using TMS, TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. It is basically used to sometimes temporarily activate, artificially activate or numb the brain by applying a sort of a magnetic field. So, when arm areas of the brain are arm areas, the areas that support control the movement of the arm, these things in the brain are stimulated using TMS, lexical decision to arm related words becomes faster. Okay. Also, in another set of studies, when fMRI was used to determine the brain response to words that refer to movements of the face like smile, or the arm like throw, or the leg like walk or run, neural responses were found comparable to the scenario when their movements were actually made. So, if I am asking you to make lexical decisions to face related words versus arm related words or leg related words, similar areas of the brain are activated as if you were actually doing that. Okay, that is something. How could this be happening? If you remember, we talked a little bit about the mirror neuron network in the speech processing week, last week that is. So, it probably is taking help of the mirror neuron system, and these mirror neuron systems are helping us simulate these kind of activities. There is a little bit of a question here, is that, say for example, whether this mirror neuron simulation happens all the time and is completely compulsory, or it could be optional, or say for example happens in some tasks and does not happen in other tasks. One of the studies at least kind of says that it might not be completely compulsory, or it might not be happening all the time. So, Tomasino and colleagues in 2008, they did this simulation, and they found that the stimulation facilitated responses only when the participants were actually asked to engage in explicit visual imagery, but not really during just visual identification. So, there is this competing set of evidences that are coming in. Okay. So, let us talk a little bit about, so this was a little bit about meaning. So, if this is the end of the meaning part, what did we learn? That meaning could be situated through a variety of ways. One is their introspection kind of thing, other is the lexical access through semantic network, the third was the association, and this fourth theory was grounded cognition, embodied manner. Okay. So, we have talked till here a little bit about how meaning is really done. Let us move to the next part of the words. You remember when we started, we talked about form representation and meaning representation. Let us talk a little bit about form representation now. Form representation basically is modeled in something referred to as lexical access. Okay. So, models of lexical access basically do not actually deal with the activation of meaning. They do not deal with activation of meaning at all. The whole point of lexical access is basically the set of mental representations or mental processes that are involved in identifying which specific words are you going to read or see or hear, okay, which form. So, for example, you are reading a particular word, you have to find a matching form in the brain. You are hearing a particular word, you have to find a matching form in the brain. Form ke baad the meaning part that happens, we have already talked about how that happens. Now, we are going to talk only about the part till activation of that form, the part that you have this knowledge that okay, I know this word, that part, that is what lexical access is. So, again specifying models of lexical access mostly deal with the activation of word form information and not really with the meaning part. I mean, the meaning part will obviously automatically happen after this, alright. Lexical access is supposed to be fast, effortless, automatic. As soon as you read a word, and if you know that word in a prior sense, this will happen very quickly, okay. And then there is this, so William Marston did this study, and they wanted to check how the lexical access thing happens. He applied this task called the shadowing task. What is a shadowing task? Basically, the headphones are there and person listens to whatever is being said in the headphones and shadows that, or say for example repeats that after whatever you are hearing, okay. So, subjects had to listen to recorded speech and repeat it as quickly as possible. Fast shadowers were able to repeat the stream of words with a lag of as little as 250 milliseconds. Slow shadowers probably do it a little bit slower. Only 3 out of 132 errors violated syntactic constraints. So, very few syntactic errors happened, showing that participants were able to perform lexical access extremely quickly. Okay. You cannot speak anything unless you have generated the morphological, phonological other things. So, that is what you learned in the speech chapter. So, if people are doing the shadowing task, they are probably going from the concept and downwards. That is how speech can happen, okay. So, lexical access, that is generating the form part, is happening very quickly, is happening as quickly as 250 milliseconds. Also, this tells us that lexical access is a highly incremental process. Speech processing and lexical access are both incremental process. Speech is first segmented into words, and the relationship between words is represented before that of the phrases or of whole sentence. So, first thing that you have to do is you access the form of the word, then you access that of a phrase, then you access that of a sentence. So, that is an incremental process. There are other kinds of tasks that also can be used for if people want to study lexical access. One of them is the word monitoring task. So, word monitoring task is very simple. You are listening or screening utterances and responding as soon as a possible target word comes. You look for it in your mental lexicon. Asha, do I know this word? Is this the word that I am looking for? As soon as you do it, you press the key. The second is gating. So, you listen to short snippets or the beginning of short snippets of the beginning of words, and you guess what is the word is that is missing. As soon as I say you would know that the other word is umbrella. So, that is called gating. Okay. It has been shown that people take almost around 200 milliseconds to recognize the words in a sentence, and even faster, around 100 milliseconds to recognize the ends of the word. Okay. So, this entire process is probably happening very quickly. You take very little time to reach the form of that word, alright. Now, people have modeled this process of lexical access in many ways. I will talk to you about the first, second and the third generation models. I do not know what portion I will cover in today's lecture. So, the first generation models are the logogen model and the frequency ordered bin search model. Then there are second generation models, the cohort and the trace model, and then there is this third generation models which are covered in the distributed cohort model and the simple recurrent network model. Let us move to these models already. The first model is John Morton's logogen model. It is the first generation model. It's one of the earliest model. It's probably happened in around, I think, 1969 or so. I don't have the exact date. John Morton's logogen model is a sort of a bottom up driven system that takes a spoken or visual input and uses it to activate previously stored word form representations. So, using this logogen model, you already should know the word, and what this model will do is it will take up input and it will evaluate that input as to whether you know this word or not. How will this evaluation happen? You look in your head, you look, say for example, whether I know this word or not. So, basically it takes this word, it kind of builds up incremental input and it matches this input to whatever representations you have in your head. The thing with which this input really matches is recognized as a word. That is what is happening. So, John Morton's logogen model, the processing units are these called logogens. Each logogen represents each word, and logogens basically are, you can look at them as evidence collecting devices. So, typically if I were to draw, I will draw this kind of a cylindrical thing. You have these bars when some work is happening, you are transferring some file from one system to the other system. There is this bar, and the bar eventually it keeps getting filled as soon as the entire thing is done. So, this is an evidence collecting device. As soon as the evidence reaches 100, this entire bar becomes green. The evidence is 50%, the bar is 50% green and 50% gray or something like that. So, you can look at logogens as those kind of things. So, logogens are evidence collecting devices, and the evidence is obviously incremental in nature, at least for as far as speech is concerned. In written form, everything is just there right at the moment, and you have to kind of when you are reading, you are developing evidence. But in speech, the evidence automatically is unfolding in time. So, the evidence is building up over time. Each word, as I said, was represented by a logogen in the model. Words are recognized when the activation of the logogen crosses a particular threshold. So, the logogens are collecting evidences, and when this evidence collection reaches a particular threshold, that is where you will recognize a word. So, as soon as the evidence reaches a particular point and you are sure that this is the word that I already know, that is the point which is referred to as the threshold. Logogens, as I said, derive input from spoken words, written words, or also preceding context. What word will be said now? Suppose I am talking about cricket and the conversation is about cricket and batting and so on and so forth. Obviously, at some point I will refer to this particular thing, that which word is going to come up. So, the context also kind of is a very important source of evidence for what word is going to come up in the conversation next. The logogen system operates on three kinds of inputs, you will see, and when individual logogens become activated above thresholds, they send out signals to the output buffer, wherein you kind of say, yes, I recognize this word, or you have to take the name of the word, you can take the name of the word. Okay. Another very important thing is, unless new input comes in and continues to activate the logogen, a decay function kind of return the logogen to its previous level. So, you read particular set of words, all of them become activated. After that, you did not read those words for days and weeks and at once. So, obviously the activation will go down. Okay. This is the architecture of the logogen system. You can look at it, stimuli can come from either the auditory side or the visual analysis sides. You can kind of look at the auditory attributes or the visual attributes, and there is this logogen system which has these, each logogen kind of is collecting evidence for each word. So, you have as many logogens as many words that you have. Okay, and there is a rehearsal loop, there is this context system which is giving semantic attributes. This is the most likely word from the semantic point of view. So, suppose say for example, if I am talking about bat in the cricketing conversation, I am not talking of the animal bat, even though they have the same form and they kind of are referred by the same phonological form, you know for sure that I am talking of the bat, that is the instrument that is used to play cricket with, but not that particular animal. So, that is something that is there. Okay. So, how does processing happen in the logogen model? There are two assumptions. Information flow is strictly bottom up. So, as soon as the input is developing, that is what is feeding to other portions. So, this input is in very incremental and bottom up in nature. Second is there is no direct connections between and among the logogens themselves. So, each logogen is an independent unit in itself and there is no connections. So, it is not like the semantic networks theory that we talked about. Okay. There is one logogen for each word that you will speak, and as soon as the input for that logogen kind of crosses threshold, you will recognize that word and you will be able to speak that word. The activity in this logogen will not be affected by the activity in any other logogen around it. Okay. So, the Logan system can account for a variety of effects. One of them is the frequency effect. What is the frequency effect? If I might remind, the frequency effect was that words with higher frequency are responded to faster than words with lower frequency. How does the Logogen system account for that? The Logogen system says that high frequency words, because they are being spoken more often than the other words, that the amount of evidence, residual evidence there is is already there, and basically what happens is that the threshold slightly becomes lower. Because the threshold becomes lower, you will need just a little bit more of the evidence to be sure that this is that word. Okay, you remember that study I always talk about, that there was this experiment going on. People were listening in their headphones, and the word was the etc., etc., about legislatures, and then there was this coughing sound exactly at the place S. But because legislature is a highly frequent word, you, with the basis of that incomplete input, you could still say that legislatures was the word that was said. Okay. Let us talk about another model, the frequency ordered bin search model. It is a different kind of a representation than the Logogen model. The frequency ordered bin search model basically represents information again in a similar bottom up kind of way, but basically words are organized in this on a different principle. The principle which the frequency ordered bin search model uses is that of morphological organization. So, what is there is that words are organized into bins by their respective root words. So, for example, the first thing that happens is that you organize the word, you morphologically decompose a word as soon as the word comes in, and you decompose the words into a root morpheme and into a suffix of that. Suppose, say for example, player, the root morpheme is play, blackboard, the root morpheme is black, something like that. So, you basically make bins with respect to those roots. Within those, so for example, the there will be a bin called play, in which play is there, player is there, played is there, playful is there, playing is there. In this, in the bin, the organization is by frequency. And how do you count frequency? As soon as you say, for example, say play, you count it as 1, you say player, you count play as 2 and player as 1, and as soon as you say playful, again in the same bin, play has even higher frequency and playful just has 1. So, the idea is that the root word will always have a higher frequency as compared to the surface words. So, this is root frequency, this is surface frequency. Root frequency is always going to be higher than surface frequency. So, you kind of keep these two things in the same bin. In the bin, the root word will be at the top, most easily accessible, and the champion of this competition. So, this is how this basically really happens. And you talk about morphological decomposition. I told you that there is a free morpheme, bound morpheme, there is derivational morphemes, all sorts of things. Typically what is happening is a word comes, you break it down into morphemes, and you put the root morpheme in charge of one bin, and every other derivational inflectional forms will all come in, but the root morpheme will be the master of that, most easily accessible member of that particular bin, because it has the highest frequency. So, how does processing really happen? If you are searching, the search will be a self-terminating search. As soon as you find that particular target word, the search will stop. Lexical representations, as I said, are organized into bins. Each bin is built around a root. So, play, player, playful, playing, all of that. Incoming stimulus is organized, is analyzed according to its root, because the root gets the listener to the correct bin. All the inflectional, derivational kind of forms are there. Is there any evidence that we do that? Apparently there is. There are two types of frequency, as I already said, surface frequency, root frequency. It has been found that root frequencies better predict response times. So, it kind of can be taken a little bit of an evidence that yes, people are using the root frequencies, roots to organize the the words in the network, in the mental lexicon, that is. Also, there is evidence for morphological decomposition. Say for example, it has been found that people find it harder to recognize words like sister Why sister as compared to grower? Because if you this word sister comes in the Forbes model, you will break it into sist and because you know that is a particular kind of a morpheme, and you will start looking for a bin with sist and you will not find it. Then you will again come back, combine this and then start looking for this word sister, because the morphological decomposition part is by default applied to every word that comes in, because the system would have come across ER as a particular kind of a morpheme. It would have broken down sister into sist and ER, but then later it found that there is no bin labeled with sist. It will recombine it and again look for it, and this will spend a lot of time as compared to the simple word like player or grower. As soon as you break this down into player, you go to the root morpheme of play, you go to that bin and there you will find player much faster as compared to how you found sister. So that is again one evidence for this. The other kind of evidence is that people really find it hard to reject pseudo words that are made up of a prefix and a real root, a false prefix and a real root. So a false prefix could be D. So you know there is a word called rejuvenate. Re is the prefix, juvenate is the root word. Suppose I give this system a false word like dejuvenate. The system will again happily break this down into D and juvenate, and then it will kind of reach the bin for the root word juvenate and start looking for dejuvenate there. It will not find dejuvenate there, and because there is no word called dejuvenate. However, if it were rejuvenate, it will quickly find rejuvenate over there. Okay, so this kind of time that people take in rejecting these kind of pseudo words, these kind of false words, also tells us that maybe people are doing the morphological decomposition, and that is what is leading to these problems. Another set of evidence for the morphological decomposition or the Forbes model comes from the fact that people have priming effects for words that shared roots. Shared roots are identical. So honest versus dishonest, the shared root is there, the word honest is the shared root. So the priming here is faster as compared to sun versus arson, because even though phonologically it is similar, the arson cannot really be divided into R and sun, because that will lead to an incorrect classification. So sun and arson is not really going to work, but honest and dishonest is going to work, and people will experience priming for this kind of setup. Okay, so these kind of priming effects that we are seeing in the morphologically related primes, these priming effects are slightly different to the semantic or the phonological or the orthographical priming that you will see in this entire course at different points in time. Phonological priming is by virtue of sound, semantic priming is by virtue of meaning, orthographic priming is by virtue of form. It might overlap a little bit with the morphological priming, but morphological priming is basically because of morphological components being shared. So that is something that you should remember. Morphological priming effects, however, are found to be very robust and work at short prime durations. Orthographic overlap does not account for priming in the morphologically related part, so that is also there. Okay. According to the neuroimaging data, it has been shown that prime target word pairs that share a root morpheme are associated with decreased neural activity. So there is some sort of a relationship there at the level of the brain as well. All right. So let us move to the second generation models. I will probably cover this model a little bit. So this is referred to as the trace model. The trace is a model of visual word recognition. So it basically is about how you read words. This is one of the models that McClellan and Rumelhart came up with, wrote that book called Parallel Distributed Processing in the 1980s, and this is how this model looks like. So you have at one level features, another level letters, and another level words. Okay. This is a model that you will see there is a lot of feed forward and a bit of a feedback as well, at least between the word and the letter level. So what is happening here is the trace is an interactive model, that is why there are both feed forward and feedback connections. It has connections between processing units that allow units between the same level to affect each other. You can see that the letters are also connected to each other and the words are also connected to each other. All right. Also, say for example, Yeah, the processing units at a higher level can affect the processing units at a lower level. There is also some kind of feedback from a lower level, which is the letter level to the word level, but no feedback from the feature level to the letter level. That is also there, you have to remember that. These connections between these components at these levels can be either excitatory or inhibitory. This is also something that one needs to remember. I would suggest that you look at the architecture in some detail. This is how this really happens, and then let us look at the processing that happens in trace model. Now, the most basic unit of analysis when you look at a visual word is features: vertical lines, horizontal lines, slanted lines, semi curved structures, and so on and so forth. In a speech, in an acoustic form, it is the phonetic features. Okay. So, visual features you see in this model are connected to letter representations. So, for example, a letter T has incoming representations from this vertical line and the horizontal line. E has incoming representations for 3 horizontal lines and 1 vertical line, and so on. Connections between features and letters are always excitatory, and letters do not feedback to features, because feedbacking there will probably preempt some of the letters. So, you do not really want that. So, letters do not feedback here, but and the connection between features and letters is straightforward, bottom up and excitatory in nature. Using cascaded activation, visual features in trace start to send any activation forward as soon as they begin to be identified, and so letter level becomes active as soon as some information starts getting accumulated at the feature section, and the letter level already starts activating some possible words because this manner of activation is cascaded in nature. Cascaded basically means as soon as information will come here, some of it will pass on here to the other levels as well. Individual features are connected to more than one letter. Sometimes, say for example, a horizontal line is at least available in A, T, G, etc., H, etc., and while it is connected to N in an inhibitory manner. So, there is no horizontal feature in N and M. So, that is why this will be connected in an inhibitory manner. Inhibitory basically means it will suppress the activation. Excitatory means it will facilitate the activation, increase the activation. Within the layer of the letters, you will see there are not many inhibitory connections are shown there, but basically what happens is A will be connected to N, will be connected to T in inhibitory fashion. Okay, because each of the letter wants to win this competition of who will get activated first. So, in the same layer, you will see that there is this mutually inhibitory connections that are there. This mutual inhibitory connections at the same level is referred to as this concept of lateral inhibition. This is something that kind of helps us take care of a lot of competition that builds up here. Letters have excitatory connections to the words. It feeds upwards the input, that the evidence that is building. So, they have excitatory connections to words that they are part of, and they have inhibitory connections to the words that they are not part of. Say for example, A will feed back in an excitatory fashion to able and trap, but it will feed forward in an inhibitory manner to the word called time. So, A will activate able and trap and table and cat, but it will suppress the activity in words like time and rhyme and dime. Okay. Letters also have excitatory and feedback connection from the word level. So, some connection comes down, some connection goes up. Some connections, say for example, for the letter A, excitatory connection will come from all the words that have A, inhibitory connection will come from all the words that do not have A, very simple. Okay. This property kind of helps us in dealing with what is called degraded input. Degraded input is what, say for example, sometimes if you are reading from a very old book, some of the things have kind of slightly gone off, but because you can kind of on the basis of this feedback coming from the word level to the letter level, you might be able to build up, acha, this might be the word, this is the most probable word that there is. Okay. So, it helps in dealing with degraded input a little bit. Okay. Also, it kind of this whole thing kind of also helps us explain what is called the word superiority effect. The word superiority effect is very simple, is that letters are recognized better if they are embedded in words as opposed to in individual sense. So, suppose say for example, I ask you to remember KGEF or KGXF or KGTF, these strings of letters, or I ask you to remember, say for example, something like femto or Zonix or something like. So if I ask you to remember these exact sequence of letters that are embedded in words, you will remember the letters better, because what you will store is, you will not store each of these letters separately, but you will store them as a word. Okay. So first, say for example, I give you a a string of 12 letters versus I give you a 12 letter word. Suppose I ask you to remember architecture, whatever number of words that there are, and I give you the same number of letters in a jumbled up fashion. You will find it easier to remember all the letters of the word architecture, because you just remembered the word. So, the trace model proposes that activation of word level form strengthens the activation of letter level representations via excitatory feedback. That is how you will remember this letters better, and that is the explanation of the word superiority effect. This is all that I had to say in today's lecture. We have talked a little bit about how lexical access really happens. We also talked a little bit in this lecture about one of the other kinds of storage of meaning, that was the grounded or the embodied semantics approach. Thank you.